Calling People versus Jennifer Crumbley, case number 222799990 FA.
Thank you, Mark Feast, on behalf of People.
Good morning, Donald, on behalf of the People.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm Sharon Smith on behalf of Jennifer Crumbley.
All right, so last night when I heard about the 55 pictures, Ms. Williams went back and called all of the jurors, all 17 of them, and asked them to not come in until 9:30, which I guess is working out well because they're also calling about the snow. So they're not going to be here till 9:30, which is good. I don't like the jury waiting while we're doing whatever we're doing. So I also believe that Ms. Smith had the opportunity to look at various pictures that were presented as evidence. I looked at all the pictures last night and I compared them to your objections, Ms. Smith, but then I thought to myself, I don't have a copy of the pictures that they agree to admit, so I can't tell if things are redundant or whatever it is.
That's why I was having a hard time, because I could see what they'd take out, but I couldn't see what else was there. But we have good news.
Yeah.
I eliminated it, and we have far less objections,
Okay.
and then the prosecution is also eliminating 2 more.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to make sure I have the 2 they're eliminating, and then number 215, right?
215.
Okay, so 215's out, 247 is out.
215's out, 247.
Okay, so then I no longer have an objection to 216. So I have, I essentially have 2 very narrow sets of objections.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I have your list, and I've looked at all the pictures, and I have the exhibit list as well. So.
okay, so first, exhibits 22 and 23. I'm sorry, 220 and 221.
Okay.
I am asking that one or the other be admitted.
Okay.
It makes it look like.
Let me meet in your desk here. Hold on
Sure.
a second. I think I know which ones you're referring to, but let me get them in front of me. 220 and 221. Who is this in the same room?
Yes, Judge.
Okay.
It's the same picture, one's just focused in, one's focused out. I would just ask that one of those be struck so it doesn't appear that there are 2 of what is in those photos.
Okay, who's is this the same room? Whose room is this?
That's the, that's Mrs. Crumbley's son's room.
Okay. You have an issue with that? Or don't they depict a similar thing?
It's the same thing. The testimony would be clear that it's the same items in the same room. It's just to give perspective for the witness and the jury.
Okay, so what's the difference? I guess the question would be why do you need them both?
Just to show the perspective of the location of the room.
Well, it appears to be next to the bed, right? So is it this one sufficient? Oh, it doesn't. Maybe you can't tell what it is.
Correct.
Yeah, that's the thing. This shows where 221 shows where it is in the room, and 220 shows what it actually is. Right? In other words, 221 shows that it's next to the shooter's bed, and 220 shows that it's whiskey. That's the reason.
I understand that. I believe that the photo from farther away, you can tell what it is, and that's simply my objection, but I understand if the court is
Yeah, I mean, at first
over objection.
At first I agreed with you, but I don't think that, I don't think you can tell this is whiskey from a whiskey bottle from this photo. I mean, I guess you could argue it. So anyway, I'm gonna allow them both.
Thank you, Judge. That's 220 and 221.
Correct.
Okay, and then the final argument is about exhibits 242 through 244. I am asking that the whiskey bottle in those 3 photographs be redacted because the whiskey bottle is irrelevant. It's the video games were not in the Mrs. Crumbley's son's bedroom. That's from in the house in general, so the court already ruled that alcohol and whiskey bottles would not be in. So I would just ask that those whiskey bottles be redacted from those 3 photos.
I guess the ruling, I have the transcript of the ruling, was more that someone having alcohol in their house is not indicative in and of itself of gross negligence. So that was the idea.
Well, I feel like, the defense argues that it looks like there's possibly 3 different alcohol bottles, and so it's unnecessary to have 3 alcohol bottles in those photos.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm gonna ask, what's the purpose of it aside from throwing dirt at the defendant?
It's the same whiskey bottles in the defendant's room, Judge. It's clearly not 3 different bottles. You can tell from the pictures that the video games were.
This isn't in the defendant's room, is it? This is in the kitchen?
No, 220 and 221.
Are the defendant's room?
Correct. It's the same.
Wait,
brand.
221 is the shooter's room or the defendant's
Shooter's room.
The shooter's
room. Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I may have misspoke.
Okay.
Okay, so then, Your Honor, if that's the same whiskey bottle, it's clear they put the whiskey bottle.
No, it's not. That's not what I said. It's
Okay.
not the same whiskey bottle. It's the same whiskey brand. The 220, 221 clearly is empty.
Okay.
242, 243, and 244. That's where this bottle with alcohol in it was found. It wasn't placed there. It's just one bottle. That's where it was found.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you to redact the whiskey bottle. I don't, barring some other evidence, the only reason to admit evidence of there being alcohol in the house is to attempt to ask the jury to believe that if someone has alcohol in their house, they might be a bad parent, or to connect it to the bottle in his room like they gave it to him or something, right?
Well, he was 15 years old at the time of the shooting. It's the same brand that was routinely purchased by the defendant and her husband over a period of weeks and months, and it's the same brand that was recovered in the art studio where they were found on December the 4th. So we do believe it is relevant, especially in light of the stated argument that defense is going to put forth.
Because I'm on national television, I don't want to tell you about the things I did when I was 15 years old, but the shooter could have taken this, right?
Taken
Or
the
bought
photograph?
it. The whiskey. Like, the jury shouldn't be able to imply that, unless there's evidence to the contrary, that the defendant and her husband were giving the shooter whiskey.
Judge, the defense counsel has stated specifically that the defendant was, if anything, a hyper-vigilant mother. And if that's going to be the argument, the people should be entitled to explore what that means and what it doesn't mean. So, these photographs were taken on November the 30th, the day of the shooting.
Mm-hmm.
The bottle with alcohol in it wasn't placed in the photograph. Detective Stoic will testify that that's just where it was found. He will testify that the empty whiskey bottle that is the identical brand to the one found in the
even be here by 9:30, they were concerned about that, so,
I believe we are still ahead of our initial schedule.
okay, so you think you're gonna rest sometime this week?
Yes, Judge.
Okay,
That's our hope.
all right,
Your Honor, I would ask if the prosecution is not calling some of their listed witnesses, they let me know, because there are witnesses on their list I intend to call if they don't, and they're
Okay.
aware of who those witnesses are.
okay. You can do that, right?
It just depends on how the trial progresses, obviously.
Okay, well, she might ask you to produce them, that's why.
Yep.
They know who I'm asking them to produce.
Okay.
I've already given the list.
All right, so we'll have a full day today. We have this, is it Stoyak today? Stoyak,
Well, like I said, we're working on schedules, but
okay,
Stoyak, Sergeant Pesky,
okay, I'm trying to think what else on my list. I think I sent you a set of instructions, you both set sets of jury instructions. The jury instructions went back and forth, and then I sent you what I believe is a final set of jury instructions. I realize that they might need to be changed a little bit, right? So if there's anything different or any objections to the current jury instructions, let me know as soon as possible.
I don't see any at this point, but Judge will
Right.
certainly keep an eye out.
Okay,
I don't either, but I obviously will have to revisit that after the proofs.
okay.
Also, proposed exhibit 424 was the interview transcript. I referenced that yesterday.
Yep.
We provided a copy to defense counsel yesterday. What we have marked now is redacted in accordance with the personal information that was redacted on the audio that we
Oh,
showed.
I see. Okay.
Your Honor, I got this last night.
Okay.
I still need a few minutes to review it.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
That's fine. It would just be, if the transcript's accurate, I'd be, admitting it. The idea would be if there's something inaudible and you do not agree what was said,
Right.
I'd either have to listen to it or strike it or whatever it was,
Well,
so.
it's not a transcript that was done by a court reporter.
Right.
It's a transcript that was put together by the prosecutor's office.
Mhm.
So I just want to double check
Sure,
to make sure that it's accurate,
Sure.
and also that there's not a side commentary in there that the jury should be making evaluations on. So for example, if this says who is crying, I would object to that being in the transcript.
well, that was a transcript made before that question was asked, so, just let me know when you're ready to indicate whether you object to any of that exhibit.
Sure, thank you.
Any other housekeeping issues right now?
I don't believe so, Judge.
Ms. Smith, anything?
No, Your Honor, but I just have like 2 pages left, and it looks like the transcript is actually fine. I just needed to review it.
Okay, sure.
Let me just, give me 1 second, and I think. Okay, so I have one objection, and it would be to page 16 of that transcript.
I don't have I don't have the transcript, but why don't you tell us what the objection is?
Sure. There's one line on here that says JRC, which would be James Crumbley, and it says, in italics, sobs. And the rest of the transcripts appears to be the words that were spoken. So I believe that characterization about sobs, when that's not a word spoken, I would ask that that be struck. Also, at the time, my client was crying, although not sobbing quite like her husband. So I think it's misleading to note that James Crumbley is sobbing, not mention anything about Jennifer Crumbley crying or sobbing, and it's just irrelevant to this transcript.
Are there any other times in the transcript when it says someone is crying or what's your response, Mr. Keith? Is that the only time?
There were no other times when anybody was crying.
I don't see any other references to people crying, and so that makes it even more,
Does it say it says JC sobbing, right? That could be either one.
no, it says JRC, so it's clear that it's
Can we try,
James
can we
Crumbley.
strike JRC? Because
Judge,
you hear audio of sobbing and they can determine who's sobbing, right?
With the transcript, Judge, it's, if the parties agree, it's admitted. If they don't, then it's not admitted. The reason why I sought to admit it is because when I played it yesterday over the court's monitors, it's not as clear as when you just.
Yeah,
the jury's
I get
going to
it.
see it on a laptop if they want to see it again.
I
so.
get it. I get what you did, because some of it was inaudible, right? So,
I don't have any objection to the transcript, but this mention about sobbing, the transcript doesn't contain other italicized portions of sobbing or crying or somebody hiccuping or anything. So this one line, I'm asking to be objected to. I'm objecting to.
okay, it is a sound on the audio, right? You can hear. Yeah.
But it's a sound on the audio, but the prosecution's big argument is that James is sobbing and that Jennifer is not crying when she may not be as audible, but that should be a decision left to this jury, not to the transcript.
Okay, but I guess James is audibly crying though, right?
I believe that you can hear Jennifer a big crier like he is.
Okay. All right, so what's your response?
Judge,
I do think it assists the jury, and if it's accurate, it can assist the jury, because it is hard to hear.
I believe it's inaccurate, it's misleading to say that James is sobbing and not mention that what Jennifer's doing.
Well, it's a transcript of what can be heard, right?
I can hear Jennifer Crumbley sniffling and sobbing. I can hear it not sobbing. I can hear her sniffling and I recognize it to be her. So I believe that the transcript should either reflect that or not reflect either parent.
Mr. Keys, what's your response?
Or the jury should decide what they hear and if they hear Mrs. Crumbley.
transcript was prepared in November of 2022. It was updated last night with the redactions. Sergeant O'Brien already testified to his impressions, his demeanor. He was there. If counsel wants to make that argument in closing arguments, she's certainly free to do so. If the court has listened to the recording, it's in evidence. It's now the court can make the determination if the transcript is accurate, and if so, it'll be given to the jury. If not, then we won't introduce the transcript if there's no agreement. But
Okay.
we believe the transcript does fairly and accurately depict what the recording showed.
It does, but what she's saying is there's an audio portion that shows he's sobbing but doesn't note that she's crying. That's the problem. So
It's counsel's interpretation that her client was crying. Sergeant Bryan was there. He said that she wasn't. And he testified
he
that
said she wasn't crying?
he said that he didn't recall her to be crying.
Did he say that?
I believe so.
I don't believe you said that.
I mean, we know what Jennifer Crumbley sounds like crying. She's cried throughout the trial. This court can make the determination. And if the court doesn't believe that this transcript is accurate,
Isn't the jury supposed to make the determination?
again, the transcript is just to assist the jury because of the audio yesterday.
Oh yeah, I get it. I think it's helpful.
So
Yeah.
if they look at it in the jury room deliberations, they'll have the technology provided by the court on a laptop. The audio is clear. I sought to omit it just because it appeared that it was difficult to hear all of it yesterday with the court's monitors in the court.
Mhm.
But if there's no agreement, we don't even need to introduce the transcript. It was offered as an aid to the jury.
Okay.
So that's fine.
All right. What else?
I believe so. They're not going to admit it then.
No, I guess not.
No?
Okay. Thank you.
I guess you gotta determine if you want it or not. What else?
I think we're just waiting for the jury and everybody. So.
I'm hopeful that will go well. We'll come out as soon as they're all here, okay? So, she'll be brought down, but I want to make sure both doors, because jurors are coming in both ways, so.
Your Honor, I have all the videos that are going to be admitted. I have not reviewed any other transcripts of videos. If the prosecution intends to use or admit any transcripts, I'm just asking if I could be provided with them so that I could look at them and if we have an issue, then I could raise it. I don't know if they intend to or not, so.
Unlikely.
Unlikely, okay.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to let you know, but can you see if yeah, because jurors could be coming in right now. Okay, so we're going to let you know when everybody's here.
Thank you.
All right. You may be seated.
I'm gonna take this out. Yeah, yeah. Okay, take that down.
I'll keep you updated.
Sounds good.
Yeah, okay. I just wanna make sure that there's not anyone else.
Okay, I will. Thank
Well,
you.
those are covered by the top. Okay. Okay, sorry, I'm just, oh, you're fine. Oh, I'm right here. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
You just marked that that was not as.
Yeah, I marked it. You are a rock star. Thank you. No, I don't. Thank you. Okay, that's amazing. And then I do have one more that I want to do like that. Do you mind helping me with that? Okay. No. Well, I don't know who's testifying because I don't get to know. All right, I'll see you in a minute. You look very nice. I love you both. That's from Halls. It's one of those ones I was telling you about. Okay. So this one I'm almost set with. Let me just finish going through. Here, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna highlight and give it to you. I've gotten to 130 on this one. Ejak, Lieutenant Marsman, and Pesci. But I need to take a look at it, and then Anderson. I'm just reviewing everything. Okay, all right. I'm gonna tell Randy to do that. I don't think the ones. There are ones that are good, but like those are like the better ones. I get a lot of like awesome, like you know. I like to bring the ones with context. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't like these.
What's that?
These are, I don't know these.
You were able to read them.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any questions about those?
No.
Okay, good. Okay. You can see what it is. Though. I know. They're not. Because I just but so at the end of the day, they're for you, but I don't want that one at the jail because it's protective order stuff. Do you want? Do you want these or?
No,
There's this. How's the phone? No, all right.
Okay.
I want you to have what you want.
Good morning, you can be seated.
When we make Ejak.
They're all here, so.
But your witness is pulling in the context now.
You're supposed to be here at 8:30.
Yes. Came from out of town.
Okay, so you don't want them going to jail yet.
No.
No, you guys don't need to go on the record yet then, right? I'll just wait for this. I'm gonna ask the jury if half an hour is enough for lunch, okay? But it gets delivered right there, so I don't know why not. So.
When that's gonna happen, can you give me a heads up? Because then I can have Elena go downstairs and grab me something. Because otherwise, I don't have enough time. Yesterday it took 25 minutes for us to get through the line to get something. I need to eat Judge and meet her.
I have some bagels that were just delivered to Judge Callahan. And
I have to have soup because nothing goes down my esophagus.
homemade soup that I made.
I can have her run down if you just give me like a little heads up.
Okay, usually the lunch is delivered around noon, so.
You know what I like? Soup. I definitely like soup. I'll write it down for you. Okay. I just need stuff to work it down. I appreciate it.
Remember the check.
I'll tell you, but because she's just saying it's half an hour, and then I'll turn down. I'll eat and then I'll run back up. Sounds good? Oh, here. And you get whatever you want. Of course. No.
usually put in tomato soup.
Okay. Just a cup.
Just one that's not like one that's easy to swallow. Like a frothy one.
Thank you. Elena is going to get my lunch. Okay. Yeah, they,
Captain, can I ask you a question?
So, you're right. I mean, in terms of, I do know that. I used to, to be honest with you, when I saw those guns coming out of us, I didn't know those were BB guns. I was like, oh my god, these people have like a lot of guns.
reason for not keeping, just so you know.
The audio is not on, right?
The audio, I can turn it off.
Sorry.
Oh, well,
I
Morning, you can see it. Are you guys okay with Pat all along? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Good. Prosecutor, who's next with this?
Mr. Nick Ejak.
I'm sorry, can you say it again?
Nick Ejak.
Nick Ejak. Good morning. Could you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth so help you God?
I do.
Please step up and have a seat. And then can you state your name for the record and spell your first and last name?
Sure. Nicholas Ejak, first name Nicholas, last name Ejak, Ejak.
Go ahead, prosecutor.
Thank you. Sir, I want to direct your attention to the fall of 2021. Where were you working at that time?
Oxford High School.
Okay, what were you doing there?
I was the dean of students.
How long had you been employed at that time with the Oxford School District?
That was my first year.
I'm sorry?
That was my first year.
Okay. And you're with a different school district now?
Correct.
Okay. Tell the jury, please, what exactly the Dean of Students at Oxford High School did.
So the dean of students is responsible for all of the student body, behavior, discipline, attendance, academic intervention, behavior intervention.
Okay. So walk us through a typical day as the Dean of Students at Oxford High School, at least in the fall of 2021.
Sure. So in the fall, also we were, in 2021, we were dealing through the COVID-19 pandemic. So in addition to those responsibilities, due to the health order, part of my responsibility was ensuring that everybody was masked up. So that was part of the job throughout the day too, was to ensure students had access to masks, but they were also wearing them. Students being referred throughout the day from teachers based on behavior they're seeing in class, students coming down to report stuff going on in the building, conflicts they're having, conflicts they're hearing about, attendance issues where kids aren't coming to school or they're showing up late frequently to class. At the time we didn't have an attendance policy coming out of COVID, so it's also part of my responsibility was to put together a policy that would work for the school.
Okay. So yesterday we heard from Sean Hopkins, who was a school counselor, and he said that there were 4 counselors. How many Dean of Students were there?
1.
Okay. So will the responsibilities of a school counselor differ from the responsibilities of the Dean of Students?
Yes, that's correct.
How so?
So counseling, they oversee, to my understanding, they oversee college and career planning, class scheduling, mental health of the student body, planning events in relation to like extracurricular activities, the Oakland Schools Technical Campus. There's a lot of responsibilities that has no relation to the Dean of Students role.
Okay. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you would be called in when there was a discipline problem in class.
Correct. That was the main function of my responsibility.
Okay. And as you said at that point, the county health department mandated masks, or is that the state order?
That was, I believe it was Oakland County.
Okay. And so it was your responsibility to also mandate compliance with that?
Correct.
Okay. So November of 2021, all students and staff were wearing a face mask?
Correct, with the exception of anyone that had a medical exemption.
Okay, thank you. Now, how long have you been in that role as of November of 2021?
That would be 4 months.
Okay. So when you started that school year?
Yes.
All right. And where did you work before? What did you do before?
So prior to that, I was a long-term substitute teacher for Lake Orion schools. Once again, coming out of COVID, I had been laid off as the dean of students out on the west side of the state, where I was running an alternative high school program. And so I had returned to this side and was able to obtain employment as a long-term substitute teacher.
Okay.
With the idea that it would be temporary for,
Sure.
for that school year.
So in November of 21, how long have you been in education?
9 years.
Okay. We heard a little bit about Power School yesterday, at least through the Oxford School District. What does that mean?
So Power School is a student information system where essentially a bunch of data on students is stored and accessible for teachers, administrators, students, and parents. Everybody has a different view of that, but it's the same system. So if you're a parent, there's a parent view where you're able to see specific things to your child as a parent. For students, it's the same thing. You can see stuff for your students, which includes your grades, missing assignments, and then like my view as a part of the school staff administration would be to be able to see all of it.
Okay.
And input information to that as well.
And as an administrator, you're able to input, is that what you said?
Correct.
Okay. And that came with every student in the district, would that be right?
Correct.
That was Jennifer Crumbley's son, a student at Oxford High School in the fall of 2021?
Yes.
Okay. Prior to November of 2021, did you have any interaction with him?
I did not know.
I want to direct your attention to November the 29th, 2021. That's the day, that's a Monday, the day before the shooting. Did you receive an email regarding Jennifer Crumbley's son?
I did, yes.
Okay, I'm going to direct you to the screen that's in front of you. This was admitted yesterday as People's Exhibit 158. This is an email to you and Ms. Pam Fine.
Correct, yes.
Okay. And it was sent from whom?
From Jacqueline Davina.
And is she a staff member at Oxford High School?
She, yes.
Okay. In what capacity does she work?
She is an English teacher.
Okay. And go ahead, and this was already admitted, go ahead and read us the email that you received.
Good morning. I had a student during first hour today, Ethan Crumbley, who was on his phone looking at different bullets at the end of first hour today as I was walking around the room passing out their essays. I didn't get a chance to investigate it a bit further since it was the end of the hour. Now that he's on my radar, I'm also noticing that some of his previous work that he's completed from earlier in the year leans a bit toward the violent side. I can bring down these things later today during my 5th hour prep if you would like them.
Okay. And this email was sent at 9:32 a.m. to both you and Ms. Fine. Please give the jury an idea of who Ms. Fine is and what her responsibilities were at that time.
Sure. So Ms. Fine is the restorative practices coordinator and the anti-bullying coordinator for the district. However, her position is housed at Oxford High School, but she does work in all the other buildings throughout the district. And she had previously been, before my employment, the dean of students there. And so due to her role with anti-bullying and restorative practices, her and I would often team up together to handle the behavior and discipline throughout the school.
Okay.
So that's why both of us were sent this email.
So when you received this email, what did you do?
So by the time I had actually...
Well, let me ask you this question. When did, if you recall, when did you actually receive the email? When did you actually read it?
When I received the email, it was probably around 11 a.m. when I was aware that there was an email.
And tell us what happened with the situation.
So when I was made aware of the email, it was coming from Ms. Fine, who had overheard me returning to my office from a meeting that I was in when this email was initially sent.
Your office was in the administrative section of the Oxford High School?
Yes.
Okay.
My office was right next to hers.
Next to Ms. Fine's?
Correct.
Okay.
And so we often would just like kind of yell out if we needed to talk to one another, and then one of us would walk over to the other's office.
Okay.
And so she had heard me returning to my office, and I remember her saying, "Hey, do you remember that email we got today?" And I said, "What email?" And that's when I had walked over to her office and pulled it up on my phone, and she began to explain to me that she had read the email and knew that I was in the meeting, and I believe she in response got it to the teacher.
Okay.
And walked me through the steps she took, which was calling the student down.
And Mr. Hopkins was with Ms. Fine in the meeting, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. The meeting had since ended, and so like she was just walking me through what they did.
Okay. So she updated you on what happened in the meeting?
I'm sorry, what?
She gave you an update on what happened in the meeting
Yes,
with
correct.
Jennifer Crumbley's son? Okay. After you received that information, did you determine if you had to take any steps regarding discipline?
It wasn't necessary that I did anything further. She did everything that I would have done.
All right. Did you have any additional interaction with that student at all on Monday the 29th?
No.
Okay. Now, moving towards, did you receive any emails later on in the evening, Monday the 29th, regarding a student. Anything at all with him?
I don't remember if I did or not.
Okay. November the 30th, Tuesday. This has already been admitted on your screen here as People's 160. This is an email from Miss Morgan. And who is she and what does she do?
Miss Morgan is a math teacher at Oxford High School.
Okay. So she sent this email to you as well as Mr. Hopkins Tuesday, November 30th at 9:32 a.m.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Up until this point in time, did you have any conversations regarding Jennifer Crumbley's son?
Prior to this email?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, tell us about that, please.
So I was in my office Tuesday morning when Miss Morgan had walked down to the front office just looking to share some information about a student that had drawn inappropriate things on a piece of paper, and I was the only person available to respond to that or to hear her out.
So let me ask you this. This is People 74. It's already been admitted. You said a piece of paper. Is this what you're referring to?
That is correct.
Okay. So prior to the email at 9:32 a.m., Miss Morgan showed you this, which has been admitted as People 74?
She showed me an image of that on her cell phone. Yes.
On her cell phone, okay.
Yes.
Do you recall about what time that happened?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just know that it was during our second period of the day. However, I don't remember what time.
Okay, that's fair.
It was.
Tell us about that conversation when she came and showed you this picture.
She had said she just needed to share that a student had written some inappropriate things on an assignment. And so I told her, I kind of waved her into my office since everybody else was occupied. And she had turned her phone around and showed it to me. And I had noticed the name on the top that I recognized from the day before.
Okay.
Ms. Fine had shared that information with me. And my response to that was, I need to go get his counselor. And her response was, I need to get back to class.
Okay. So that was in the second hour, you think?
Correct.
Okay, so obviously it was before the email sent at 9:30?
Yes.
All right. Now, what was your initial response in seeing this, Exhibit 74?
That I needed to alert his counselor.
And why is that?
Because it seemed like he might need somebody to talk to, or we might need to figure out how we could get him some additional help.
Okay. Now, when you first looked at this drawing, what's the first thing that jumped out at you?
The statements.
Which
the
one in
blood,
particular?
blood everywhere is what I noticed first. The world is dead. My life is useless. Those were the things that stood out to me.
Okay. So when you were shown this, were you thinking of a lens through discipline or through his counselor?
Counseling, 100%.
Why do you say 100%?
Because I don't notice anything on there that would rise to the level that there would be any type of student discipline.
Okay. So what happened next, please?
So she left Miss Morgan left my office, and I left my office as she returned to her classroom, and I walked down to the counseling area to alert Mr. Hopkins.
Okay. And did you show this drawing to Mr. Hopkins?
I did not.
Okay. When you say you alerted him, what do you mean?
So when I arrived to the threshold of the doorway in his office, before I even said a word, he said to me, Ethan Crumbley, and my response was, yeah, how did you know? And so he had shared that he had received an email that morning from another teacher regarding Ethan Crumbley, and his understanding was that's why I was there, and that's when I had shared with him that I had received a drawing from Miss Morgan with those statements on it.
Okay, this drawing right here, Exhibit 74?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Now tell us what happened next, please.
His response, Mr. Hopkins' response to that was, I'll go get him from class right now. And he stood up from his chair and walked down to the math class and grabbed Ethan.
Okay, did you go with him or did you stay?
I remained in his office.
Okay. And did Mr. Hopkins bring him back to his own office?
Yes, he did.
Okay, and what did you do?
I sat in there and mostly listened to the conversation.
Okay, let me stop right there.
Sure.
So, just so we're clear in the chronology, Mr. Hopkins retrieved the defendant's son from class, brought him back to his office where you were waiting?
Correct.
Okay. And then was a conversation ensued between Mr. Hopkins and the defendant's son?
Yes.
Okay. Now, he testified yesterday, so without telling us what words were actually said by each other, tell us what you did and why.
I just sat there to listen for one, to be an additional adult for support. I feel it's important in my job to know that there's more than one adult in the building that cares about the students. And so it was important to me that I was there for support, but also there in case there was a reason that there was behavior that rose to the level for discipline.
Okay. And during that initial conversation, did your opinion ever change to look at this as a counseling lens or a discipline lens?
No, it did not change.
Was a decision made to call that student's parents?
Yes.
Okay. And who made the decision?
Sean had made that decision.
Okay. And were you there when he made that phone call?
I was, yes.
All right. And we have evidence to suggest it was at 9:24 and 9:27 a.m. when phone calls were made. Does that sound right to you?
Yes.
Were you in the office when the calls were made?
I was, yes.
Okay. Were you in the office when a portion of the phone call was on speakerphone?
I was, yes.
Tell us what you recall from that conversation.
So I recall Mr. Hopkins putting the phone on speaker so that the conversation could be had collectively. And so Sean Hopkins had introduced myself and said we were there with Ethan. And during that conversation, he had forwarded the email that we got of this assignment to his mother.
Is that the defendant, Jennifer Crumbley?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So that she could see it in real time while we were having the conversation.
Okay. Did the defendant make any statements regarding that?
I believe she said, "What were you thinking? Why did you do this?"
Okay. And that was while on the speakerphone where her son would be able to hear?
Yes.
Okay. Were you there when, at some point the defendant and her husband arrived at the school?
Correct.
Okay. So in the time period that elapsed from that phone call to the time period when the defendant and her husband arrived at the school, what did you do?
So once the conversation had ended, we had already changed class periods, and it was now our third hour of the day. And so his backpack was still remaining in the math class, and so it's a common protocol that our security or a hall monitor or someone will go retrieve the students' belongings if they're still waiting on a parent meeting or still having a conversation. That way it's not left when other students arrive.
Okay, so what did you do?
So I left Mr. Hopkins' office and walked down to Miss Morgan's classroom to retrieve his backpack.
Okay, and did you give it to him?
Yes, I did.
Okay. At that point in time, with the COVID protocols in place for students using lockers?
Not at all.
Okay, so every student had a backpack with them at all times?
Every student had a backpack.
Okay. Now, what was your expectation of what was to occur at the meeting with James and Jennifer Crumbley at the school?
So my understanding is that we were going to discuss what would be best to move forward next for getting him some additional help, and that would be happening that afternoon.
Okay. As in happening that afternoon, what does that mean?
That he would be leaving from the parent meeting with his parents.
Okay. Were you in the counseling office during the meeting with James and Jennifer Crumbley?
For most of it, yes.
Okay. And who led the meeting primarily?
Mr. Hopkins did.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about how that meeting progressed.
So when I arrived, Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley were already in his office, and they had already began talking about the events that led to the parent meeting, and the edited drawing.
Yeah, you said edited. So this is Exhibit 123. So is this what you're referring to as the edited drawing?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
That was on the table because Mr. Hopkins had retrieved that from the teacher when he went to get Ethan from class.
Okay.
So that was on the table, and for them to view. Although, like I mentioned before, Sean had emailed a copy of the original document to Mrs. Crumbley, and so they were kind of discussing what was next. And she had a pamphlet or a packet of resources that the district provides.
So who gave her that?
Sean, Mr. Hopkins would.
Okay. And we say resources, what do you mean by that?
Different counseling resources available in the area, and it's like a standard packet that the school district would have on hand to provide to anybody that needed it.
Okay. Have you been involved in meetings where that sort of information has been provided to parents in the past?
Yes.
And you said that's a standard list of information or
It's
resources?
just a general list, yeah,
Okay.
of stuff in the surrounding local area.
Does that include facilities or organizations that allow same-day counseling appointments?
That I'm not sure of.
Okay. Are you familiar with Common Ground?
I am familiar with Common
And what is that organization?
So that is, they offer a couple different things. So they offer mental health resources. You can call hotline to speak to somebody. You can even go there for like day of intake screening assessments. And that is the organization that in previous districts I worked in that a lot of students that have been seen for mental health had went to
Okay.
day of.
And they're here in Oakland County.
Correct, yes.
All right. All right. Now, clearly your expectation of what was to happen at a meeting was not met. Tell us about that, please.
So, throughout the conversation, I had overheard his parents confirm the things that Ethan was sharing with us in his office that were kind of explaining the drawings and the words that he had written that supported him feeling sad. And so he had shared that a dog had passed away recently, a grandmother had passed away, and then one of his close friends had moved within the last month or so. And then that he was very interested in designing video games, and that had led to a argument the night before that he should be more focused on his academics rather than the video games.
Did she provide any details about that argument?
No.
Okay. Did she provide any details about how the circumstance in which when his friend moved away?
No.
I'm sorry, please continue.
And that he really struggled through the pandemic with the virtual learning, as many students did, and that they felt like he should put more focus on his academics than spending time working through the video game design.
So at any point, did you see this as anything different than your initial perception, which was a mental health issue?
No.
Okay. You said you had the backpack with you and you provided it to the student. Okay. At any point, did anybody request to search the backpack?
They did not.
Okay. And did you search the backpack yourself?
I did not. It wasn't necessary or rise to the occasion that I do that because I didn't have any reasonable suspicion
Okay.
to do that. And I need that.
Explain what that means, please.
Sure. So reasonable suspicion means that there needs to, by law says you have to have some type of reasonable suspicious activity that would lead to searching student belongings. And so typically that's like a report that someone has a vape pen or a weapon or that they're securing something they're not supposed to have at school, or nervous behavior when you have their belongings, which is very typical of students that we have searched in the past. They usually, their behavior will change when you're in possession of their stuff, and none of that was present at that moment.
Okay. And again, it's a lot of details. Well, have you ever met the defendant before, Jennifer Crumbley?
I have not known.
You ever met her husband before?
I have not known.
Prior to this day, you ever met her son before?
I did not know.
Okay. And was he wearing a face mask the entire time?
He was wearing a, yes,
Okay.
a COVID mask.
Now, was there a desire for him not to be left alone at this point?
That's what Sean had stated during the meeting when we were discussing what to do moving forward. And so his recommendation was that Ethan receive outside counseling as soon as possible today, if possible, meaning the 30th.
Mm-hmm.
And the response to that was, we can't take him anywhere today, we have to go back to work.
And who said that?
Mrs. Crumbley said that.
The defendant did?
Yes.
Okay. What was your reaction to that?
It seemed a little odd based on my experiences in previous similar parent meetings when students are being seen for mental health.
Tell us about that.
Could you rephrase that? Tell us about
So
it.
why did it seem odd to you?
Because typically...
Your Honor, objection is to relevance, what he's experienced with other parents.
Just it's similar to Mr. Hopkins' testimony yesterday.
Well,
You can lay a foundation that he's been in these meetings before. And,
Go ahead.
okay.
Yeah.
So, sir, you've had the opportunity to be in these type of parent meetings before with mental health issues?
Yes.
Okay. And could you put a number for the jury and how many you've been a part of?
Between 5 and 10 of them
Okay.
across the time of my education.
Okay. So calling in a parent for an immediate meeting, that's not a regular thing that occurs, correct?
It is not.
Okay. So that's something that something has to cause the school administration to do that.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now, you testified earlier that it was your expectation that the defendant or her husband would take the defendant's son home, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And this did not meet your expectation, but you found it to be odd. So comparing what happened November the 30th with everything in your prior experience, tell us why you felt that to be odd.
Typically, when it's recommended that parents take their children to seek out mental assistance immediately, they follow the direction of the mental health professional, and that's been my experience every time.
In this case, that would have been Sean Hopkins.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Now, what was your impression of how that meeting ended on the 30th?
It sort of seemed like it ended abruptly. It was a very short meeting. I want to say it was somewhere near 10 minutes long.
Okay.
And once it was determined that they were not going to take him home, it was stated that he would end up having to walk home if he was going home and then be home by himself.
And who said
that? Ethan had said that.
Okay. In front of his parents?
Yes.
Did either Jennifer or James dispute that?
No, they didn't.
Okay. Please continue.
And that's when Sean had responded that he really didn't want Ethan to be home by himself alone, and that he thought it was best that if he wasn't going to leave that morning with his parents, that he remain in school so that he could be surrounded by other people, and that he would monitor his attendance and check in with him.
Okay. Nothing further.
Cross?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. In terms of your experience, I understand prior to becoming the assistant dean, you were a long-term substitute over in Lake Orion. In what?
I have a master's degree in education and human development, and a bachelor's degree in sociology.
And did you ever have any training specific to disciplining students or discipline issues?
Yes, on-the-job training.
When you say you had on-the-job training, where was that?
So my job previous to being a long-term substitute teacher, I was the dean of students for an alternative program in charge of behavior and discipline. And then I spent 3 years for Brandon School District as an intervention specialist. And so I specifically dealt with student behavior.
In the trainings you did, were you taught signs of things to look for in students that would have discipline issues?
Yes, I was.
I believe you mentioned that one of those signs that you would know to look for in terms of thinking about what, if you need to search their backpack, would be whether they seem nervous when you're holding their materials, correct?
Yes.
Now, in this case, there was a time where you walked down to the classroom and retrieved Mrs. Crumbley's son's backpack.
Yes.
And you carried that backpack to the office where you were meeting with Mr. Hopkins and Mr. Crumbley's son, Mrs. Crumbley's son.
Yes.
When you carried that backpack back to Mrs. Crumbley's son, he did not appear to be nervous at all that you were holding his backpack.
He didn't appear to even care that I was holding his backpack.
And so based on him not caring or showing signs of nervousness, you had no concern there was anything in that bag.
I had no reasonable suspicion to search his belongings, no.
You did make the observation that that bag felt unusually heavy.
That is not correct.
Did you ever make the observation about how heavy the bag seemed?
I made a joke to Miss Morgan at how easily she picked it up and then handed it to me and my arm dropped. And so it was more of a joke of how strong she was compared to handing it off to me.
I see. So you had training through your employment with the Brandon School District. Is that
Correct,
yes?
yes.
You had training when you were working on your undergraduate degree.
Correct, yes.
You obviously have your advanced master's degree.
That is correct.
You have the experience from working in the school across state.
That is correct.
And you probably have attended other seminars and things to keep up to date on any recent developments in this area.
Yes.
How many additional hours would you say you've spent in those additional trainings?
I'm not sure.
Are you required to do a certain number per year?
No, I'm not.
But you do those trainings?
Yes.
Have you done more than one training?
Yes.
More than 5?
No.
So your main job or responsibility at Oxford High School was to be in charge of discipline issues with the students.
That was one of them, yes.
And when you were looking at any situation involving Mrs. Crumbley's son, there was nothing that you determined required a disciplinary action.
There was nothing that had required discipline in that situation, no.
So we talked yesterday about how Mrs. Crumbley's son was caught looking up bullets during class time.
Yes.
There was no discipline needed after he's looking up bullets in a classroom?
That doesn't reach to the level where there would be a consequence.
And with respect to that issue, there was a phone call and a voicemail left for Mrs. Crumbley.
That is correct.
You were present when Ms. Fine left the message?
I was not present when she left the message.
Mr. Hopkins was present when the message was left.
I can't speak to that.
Thank you. As far as you knew, Mrs. Crumbley was not asked to come to the school regarding the bullets,
As far as I know, she wasn't, no.
and Mrs. Crumbley was not asked to call back to the school, as far as you know,
She was asked to return the phone call if she had any questions about what had occurred.
but not asked to return the phone call no matter what.
No, we often just give parents phone calls when we meet with students regardless of the issue, just to keep them informed on what we talked about, without a request to return phone call.
Now, when you were speaking with the prosecutor, you were shown exhibit number 158. I'm going to pull that up on the screen. Okay, so I've got 158 up there. And this is an email chain that went between Miss Kubina and yourself. Is that correct? I'm sorry, I'll back up. I can see that this went between Miss Kubina and Sean Hopkins. Were you made aware of the contents within this email that's in Exhibit 158?
Yes.
And in Exhibit 158, Ms. Kubina wrote, not only was he looking up the bullets, but that when she reviewed his previous work that he's completed, it leans towards the violent side, correct?
That's what it says, correct.
Did you go and ask Ms. Kubina to provide you some of the work he completed that appeared violent?
I did not do that, as it wasn't necessary.
So it was not necessary for you to specifically speak with Ms. Crumbley in any way about the bullets, drawing, or research.
It was not necessary.
And it was not necessary for you to look at what were described as violent side indications in his prior work.
It was not necessary because another staff member had already taken care of this issue, so I didn't need to get involved any further.
And you did not mention to Mrs. Crumbley at any point in time that a teacher had described prior work of her son to be on the violent side.
Can you rephrase the question?
Sure. Did you ever talk to Mrs. Crumbley that there was an indication from a teacher that her son had prior work that leaned on the violent side?
During the meeting that we had on the 30th.
You're saying you discussed...
We discussed that during the meeting we had on the 30th.
But at that time, you didn't even have the violent leaning materials, correct?
That is correct, no.
And you didn't show her any of the examples that you would say would be violent leaning materials.
I didn't have those to show her, no.
And as far as you were aware, well, I'll ask if you were you aware if anyone ever discussed violent leaning drawings or violent leaning work in the past with Mrs. Crumbley? Are you aware?
I'm not aware of that, and nor there was any documentation prior to this that would describe that.
Now, on November 30th, we know that you were told inappropriate things were being drawn on the math paper. Or you testified that inappropriate things were drawn on the math paper, correct?
That is correct.
And when you're talking about the math paper, you're speaking about what we see in Exhibit 74 that has drawings and writings by Mrs. Crumbley's son on the paper.
That is correct.
You're aware that Mrs. Crumbley's son was drawing these things and writing these words during class time when he was supposed to be working on this review, correct?
Yep.
And that did not create a discipline issue to you?
When he's seen for mental health, that supersedes any type of minor violation that this would potentially rise to, but this doesn't violate any of the code of our conduct. So there wouldn't be discipline, and as I mentioned, because of the fact that he was being seen by his counselor for mental health, that's what takes precedence in the situation.
That was explained to Mrs. Crumbley. This is not a discipline issue. Your son is not in trouble for this drawing, correct?
Yes.
And you explained to Mrs. Crumbley, we're concerned about mental health, not disciplining him for this drawing.
Yes.
And during that meeting, it was a conclusion by you that this was not, you and Mr. Hopkins together, that this was not a discipline issue, but a mental health issue.
So I was there for discipline and behavior, so that question was posed to me to make that call as part of my job.
And what was the call you made?
The call that I made was that there's no discipline warranted, that I'm more concerned that he gets the help that he needs.
During that meeting, were you aware that another teacher had reported Mrs. Crumbley's son was looking at a violent video in class?
Yes, that is why Sean thought that I had come to his office that morning. So he had shared that he had gotten an email from the other teacher.
Did you ask to see the violent video that Mrs. Crumbley's son had been watching while he was in class?
I did not ask to see that, as it wasn't necessary.
You found it to not be necessary to take a look at the video that he had been watching?
No.
You didn't even ask Mrs. Crumbley's son, hey, can I see it? Take a look at that video.
Well, since it was described as not like a live event, and due to the fact that most teenagers are watching violent movies, video games, pre-recorded on YouTube, it doesn't rise to the occasion where you would be concerned.
And it also didn't rise to the occasion that you felt he should be disciplined for watching a video during class time.
That also wouldn't rise to the occasion of a violation of our code of conduct. That would be more of a teacher-managed behavior. You would never be suspended for that, or it wouldn't rise to that occasion.
I went to school in a different day and age where you had to do school during school. So it sounds to me like during school, Oxford High School allows more freedom than what I experienced. So it was okay that he was looking at the bullets. That's not a discipline issue.
It's not that it was okay, it just doesn't rise to the occasion that you receive a suspension as a consequence. We have to rely on restorative practices instead of going right to suspension, as you mentioned that you might have experienced when you were in school. And we have to consider how the student's behavior interferes with the day and discuss that with them and talk about how we could move forward, and that has to be considered for all minor violations before you would ever consider a suspension, and that's something that we have to do by law.
So, when you're considering all of these things, you're ultimately concluding these are minor violations, if they're violations at all, correct?
That is correct.
Looking at bullets in the classroom,
Yes.
looking at a violent video on his phone,
Yes.
the drawings on this math paper,
Yes.
the drawings on the amended math paper where Mrs. Crumbley's son made other marks on the page.
So the drawings at the moment were not as important as a standout as the statements were. So when you have the explanation of the desire to design video games, and that's how he was practicing the drawing, and you have the parents confirm that information, it lowers the level of concern immensely.
So you took into account the context of what you were understanding, and that was part of what helped you conclude this was not a disciplinary issue.
That is correct.
Now, in terms of any disciplinary issues with Mrs. Crumbley's son prior, would those show up on Power Schools?
They would, yes.
It's fair to say that when you look at Power Schools, you don't see any history of disciplinary action against Mrs. Crumbley's son.
There was no history of discipline for Mrs. Crumbley's son.
All of his grades are available to be seen. Mrs. Crumbley's son, while he may not have had the best grades, had overall passing grades.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Pretty average for a student at the time, yes.
And when you're on Power Schools, you can also see attendance records and be able to tell if the student was in school often or missed school often, correct?
Yes.
And it appears from Power Schools that Mrs. Crumbley's son had very regular, very good attendance.
He did have regular attendance, yes.
So when you are looking at Mrs. Crumbley's son, it's fair to say he comes to you with no history that would cause you to be on higher alert.
That is correct.
And when I asked about prior incidents of discipline or things along those lines, you did not see anything from the 2020 to 2021 school year documented regarding discipline.
No, we would be able to see anything that would be in the history of attending Oxford schools, and there wasn't anything.
When you heard the phone call to Mrs. Crumbley where she was asked, or it was suggested that a parent come to the school, her immediate reaction, you wanted to see her immediate reaction to seeing the paper from math class, correct?
Can you rephrase that question, please?
Sure, and I apologize. You testified that you wanted her immediate reaction when she saw the math paper you were dealing with, correct?
I wasn't looking for her immediate reaction. It was more, we're going to send you this that he just drew so you have it in front of you.
But you did end up getting her immediate reaction because
Yes.
she was on the phone at the time?
Yes.
On speakerphone.
Yes.
And you testified that her first reaction was to ask her son, what were you thinking? Why did you do this?
Yes.
When you call parents and say, I need a parent to come up here for a meeting, oftentimes one parent or the other comes to the school.
That's not necessarily true.
Well, there are times where both parents come to the school together.
Yes.
There are also times where one parent or the other parent come to the school.
Yeah, fair statement.
And when you're asking for a parent to come to the school, you are not specifically saying it has to be mom, or it has to be dad, or it has to be both, correct?
It just has to be whoever's legally allowed to, yes.
And in this case, legally allowed to would be both mom and dad, Mr. Crumbley and Mrs. Crumbley.
Yes.
So according to your request for a parent to come to the school, it's perfectly okay if it would be Mrs. Crumbley who comes, Mr. Crumbley who comes, or both parents.
Yes.
In this circumstance, both parents came to the school.
Correct.
And they both attended the meeting that lasted approximately 10 minutes, as you said.
Correct.
Now, this was the first time that you ever had the Crumbley parents come to the school regarding their son, correct?
That I was involved in? Yes.
And that you're aware of.
That, yes.
You would have seen on Power Schools if Mrs. Crumbley had been up at the school many times the year before, or the year before that, or the year before that, correct?
It depending on the type of meeting, potentially. If they're meeting with a teacher, it probably wouldn't be listed in Power School.
So discipline meetings would have been on there, and you didn't see
Correct.
any history of Mrs. Crumbley coming to the school for discipline.
That's correct.
So she was a person that when she arrived, you did not know from prior occasions with, you had not had many communications or any communications with Mrs. Crumbley where you would know who she is or how she is.
That's correct.
During the meeting, Mr. Hopkins, supplied Mr. Crumbley and Mrs. Crumbley with the sheet of resources, including many therapists listed.
That's correct.
And on that sheet, there's also Common Ground is listed in some other mental health facilities.
I can't speak to what's included on the list.
During that meeting, you indicated to Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley that you wanted them to get counseling for their son.
I did not indicate that, no.
Mr. Hopkins did.
Yes,
But you agreed with that.
I do.
And when that happened, there was not any specific direction, you need to go to Common Ground.
No, the direction was as soon as possible, that day if possible.
As soon as possible, that day is possible, if possible, but it's okay if it was going to end up being on a different day.
I can't speak to that. I can speak to the statement that was made that Mr. Hopkins would be following up within 48 hours to ensure that they had made arrangements for that, which means they had 48 hours to secure some type of counseling.
And by secure some type of counseling, you mean scheduling an appointment, making steps to get mental health counseling, correct?
Correct, after they said they were not going to be taking their son out that day.
Now, during the meeting, as the Dean of Students, you're aware that there are some circumstances where children or students at Oxford High are not permitted to stay at school, correct?
There are situations where students wouldn't be permitted to stay at school, yes.
If a student comes to school and is positive for COVID, you would not allow the student to stay there.
That's a fair statement, yes.
If a student has a temperature and is sick, you would not allow the student to stay there.
We would request that they were picked up.
And if the parent said, no, I'm not going to get them, they're fine, the school would still say, no, you have to take them home, correct?
We've said that in the past and it still hasn't happened.
It hasn't happened where a parent hasn't taken the child home. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is, in that specific case where students have had a fever and parents refuse to come pick them up, they remain at school. I've been in those situations before where parents were refusing to come pick them up.
So you end up letting so there are times then where you want the child picked up, but they don't get picked up, and the school doesn't do anything about it to force the parents to come.
There's nothing that we have the power to do to force parents to do anything.
If there was a discipline issue, if you had looked at this as a discipline issue and told a parent, your child cannot stay here because of this discipline issue, you do have the authority to say you must take your child home, correct?
I have the authority to recommend that. However, I can't force them to do that. If it doesn't reach to a level where there's any type of illegal behavior, I wouldn't be able to do anything further than recommend that they get up there because the child cannot remain at school. But I can't force them to do anything.
Okay, but in this circumstance, in this particular circumstance, there was discussion where ultimately it was okay, in your mind, for Mrs. Crumbley's son to remain in school.
From a discipline standpoint, yes. There wasn't a reason to suspend him. There was no violation of our code of conduct that reaches the level of suspension.
And if you thought Mrs. Crumbley or Mr. Crumbley were neglecting their son medically, you are mandated by law to report that, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
So it's fair to say that even looking at it from a counseling mental health perspective, you did not find that Mr. Crumbley and Mrs. Crumbley were meeting a level of being so neglectful that you needed to call to report that, correct?
No, because I wasn't made aware of all the additional information that they were withholding.
It's important for you to have all the information you can, correct?
True. But I
You
can't
would-
force people to share information with me.
You would also agree that the school had information they didn't share with Mrs. Crumbley.
We had shared all the information that we had with her at the time of the parent meeting.
You would agree with me that there has been claims of prior disciplinary issues that from your documentation in Power Schools is not even included, correct?
I wouldn't agree with that, no.
I'm sorry, did I misunderstand? Is those prior discipline issues are on there?
There weren't any prior discipline issues.
Right, so there's no prior discipline issues listed on there. You testified you never spoke with Mrs. Crumbley about discipline issues.
Yeah, that's correct.
So you don't have any evidence that Mrs. Crumbley received all the information that the school would have or could have known.
Can you rephrase that question?
You don't know that Mrs. Crumbley had received information about every specific situation with her son, correct?
The specific information discussed in the emails that was shared with Mrs. Crumbley.
Right, so on that day, you're discussing with her limited information compared to the whole picture.
It was the information that we had at the time. All the information we had was shared with her.
Are you saying that when they came in, you shared the emails with her too?
So the emails that we received from the teachers, correct?
Oh, okay, okay.
At no point in time did you believe that Mrs. Crumbley's son posed a threat to the school.
He did not pose a threat to the school, no.
If he posed a threat to the school, that's something that you have been trained in to identify, correct?
Correct. We had had previous threats that year that I handled completely different based on the fact that
They were
it was a
threats.
perceived threat, correct.
And when something is a threat, how is it that you handle it differently? Is the student allowed to stay in school?
No.
So you are the decision maker about whether or not there is a threat overall.
I wouldn't say that I'm the decision maker, but I have the power to heighten it to the level where we can get other people involved that can make a more informed decision.
And you're the one that has the training on that topic.
I'm one of them, yes.
And in this case, your conclusion was that the shooter's son was not a threat.
There was no threat present at the time, no.
You also took into account that what Mrs. Crumbley's son said made it sound like there were issues of sadness versus anything threatening, correct?
Correct, which is very typical of most teenagers.
Very typical.
Very typical of most teenagers, especially at that time with COVID, to feel sad. It was not unusual to hear that throughout the day.
Now, some of the statements on the math paper, you saw the statements that say things like, I love my life so much, and OHS, which I assume stands for Oxford High School, rocks, correct?
Yes.
Those kind of statements also would you agree those are mixed signal kind of statements?
No, I would say it looks like you have a teenager who is trying to not get in trouble, knowing that the dean of students is involved. Most of the time when I'm involved in student meetings, the kids always think they're in trouble, which is not necessarily always the case. So I looked at that as he was trying to get himself out of being in trouble. Thinking he was going to be in trouble from this meeting we were holding.
And that was something that's not unusual for you to see?
That's not unusual, no.
That doesn't mean there's a threat to you?
That doesn't mean there's a threat, no.
In terms of Oxford and the area community, you're familiar with the fact that students at the school, there are many who are interested in hunting, guns, target practice, that kind of thing, correct?
Yes, during hunting season, it's kind of like a reminder that sort of gets put out for students that go hunting in the mornings before the late start Wednesdays to remember to not come to school in their gear and or have weapons in their vehicles from that morning. And like we've also had students that pose with guns for their homecoming pictures as well. So it's very common in the Oxford community.
Okay, so it's so common that there are students, they pose for homecoming
There have
pictures?
been students that will pose with guns in their homecoming photos.
When you're talking about homecoming photos, you're talking about like the dance.
They're dressed up at home and taking photos, correct?
So they're dressed up in their, little party dresses, and they're holding guns in the photographs before they go to the dance?
Yes.
And you're saying that there are students who go hunting in the mornings before even coming to school?
Yes. So at the time, we had late start Wednesdays, so school didn't start till 10:20ish. So when hunting season would start, they potentially could be out hunting with their parents in the morning.
So in addition to what you did know in this case, seeing a gun or talks of a gun, that was not something that caused alarm to make you think there was some kind of threat.
No, nor
Guns-
was I aware that he even had a gun.
Guns at that school are very common. Then it sounds like it's a common topic if they're in pictures of homecoming dresses and things like that.
I would say across many schools, it wouldn't be uncommon to see guns drawn on assignments or papers. Oftentimes, there are certain books or part of the curriculum, and students end up drawing guns to represent stuff in the stories.
Now, my understanding is that you guys recommended immediate care. I'm sorry, I'm going to strike that. I was going into a question I've already asked you. You did not think it was strange that the parents were not taking their son out of school, specifically with Mrs. Crumbley's son on November 30th, correct?
I did think it was strange that they didn't take their son.
You've testified before in civil cases regarding what happened at Oxford High School, correct?
I have, yes.
And specifically on September 14th of 2022, you testified in a deposition, correct?
That sounds about right, yes.
And when you testify in a deposition, it's not like a courtroom like this, right?
No, it's not.
But you still have to swear to tell the truth and take an oath before you testify.
Correct.
On that day, you were specifically asked, so them not taking Ethan home that day, you did not find that to be strange and out of the ordinary. Your answer was no. There would have been no reason for him to go home.
That was in regards to student discipline. So the context, I believe, is important there.
That's in regard to student discipline.
Correct.
But that was the question you were asked that day and the answer you gave.
In regards to being disciplined or suspended, correct.
And in terms of a mental health consideration, it was not something that arose to the level where as a mandatory reporter, you would have to report the Crumbleys for being neglectful. We've already established that, correct?
Yes.
in the meeting you had, there was no indication, and there is nothing in Mrs. Crumbley's son's record to show there had ever been a previous concern about the need for mental health to Mr. Crumbley.
Judge, I think we've already asked and answered this question.
You asked this already?
No, I asked about prior discipline, but I didn't ask about prior notations mental health was necessary.
Okay, I'll allow it. Go ahead.
From a school standpoint, we did not have any record of mental health.
Now, when you testified previously, you testified that Mrs. Crumbley seemed receptive and willing to get mental health treatment for her son.
That was my understanding at the end of that meeting, yes.
Although maybe not that day, it was your understanding she was on board and was going to make an appointment or do something within 48 hours.
That was my understanding and hope.
When you were in the meeting and the struggle was discussed, ongoing struggle between the Crumbleys and their son, would you agree with me that the parents were making statements about they were concerned with their son's schoolwork and grades?
They just confirmed that they had the argument. They didn't provide any context or details about anything other than what he had shared with us before they arrived.
Were you aware there was a specific concern related to Mrs. Crumbley's son having missing assignments specifically?
The only information that she provided was that he struggled with virtual learning, which was confirming what he had also shared with us. But there was nothing specific that I remember her sharing.
And you would agree with me that when you meet with parents, parents all react differently to their child being brought down to the office.
That depends on the situation.
So depending on the situation, parents may have a variety of reactions.
It depends on it depends on what the meeting is, yeah. What the meeting is about, why we're meeting with the parents and the child.
Obviously, when parents come to the school, they're showing you a level of concern to make sure to handle whatever it is going on, correct?
Somewhat, yeah.
And you're aware that when the parents are coming to a meeting, they are going to be getting information and from you and from other professionals at the school.
As well as providing information that they have, because they're the experts on their child. So part of the meeting is to share what we have, but also to listen to confirmation or additional details about stuff that they might be seeing outside of school, at home. And that information was not provided.
There was no information provided to you that the Crumbleys had concerns over mental health issues. Fair to say?
That's fair to say.
I have nothing further.
You're direct.
Thank you. Mr. Ejak, let's talk about the whole picture.
Okay.
So, you testified that as Dean of Students, you needed reasonable suspicion to search a student's personal items such as a backpack.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And on November the 30th, 2021, it was your perception with the information you were given that you didn't possess reasonable suspicion.
That's correct.
And you also had a perception with the information you were given on November 30th, 2021, that the defendant's son wasn't a threat to anyone else.
That's correct.
Okay. So, you had told us that Jennifer Crumbley just confirmed some items that her son had told you prior to her arrival.
Yes.
Did she ever tell you that in March of 2021 and April of 2021 that her son was hallucinating, or at least expressing that he was hallucinating?
No, she did not.
Okay. Did she ever tell you in April of 2021 that she had told her friend that she thought her son was depressed?
No, she did not.
Did she ever tell you that as early as June of 2021, she had indicated that he had obtained his own firearm?
No, she did not.
Okay, now one of the reasons you told us about reasonable suspicion, you said if you believe a student has a weapon or access to a weapon. Is that important to you as Dean of Students?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. If you had information that a student had access to a firearm in conjunction with that photograph that you saw, Exhibit 74, what would that indicate to you?
That would indicate that I need to heighten it to the next level and involve our school resource officer as well as the other administration.
Okay. And did Jennifer Crumbley ever tell you that she had given her son a 6-hour 9mm handgun just 4 days before this drawing was created?
She did not know.
Would that have been important to you?
Absolutely, yes.
Would that have helped complete the full picture?
It would have, and it would have completely changed the process that we followed.
Now, you talk about decision makers. Between parent and child, who's the decision maker?
The parent.
Okay. And decision makers as to if a student stays in school or not. Who's a decision maker? Parent or administrator?
I would object because in this case there has been discussion and testimony that the student was a part of the decision and so were the parents. And so I would say that the opinion on this question is irrelevant.
So,
Part of the decision?
I take it the objection is on MRE 401 relevance? In response, counsel on her cross-examination specifically asked him about the decision maker, he being the decision maker, and I believe this
Yeah, I'm
was-
going to allow it.
Thank you. Okay, so between you, Mr. Hopkins, Jennifer, and James Crumbley, who were the decision makers?
So I would say the main decision maker would have been the parents.
The parent. And you've never seen the defendant's son.
Your Honor, I would ask that the prosecution stop asking leading questions.
Sustained.
That's fine. Okay. If you were given the full picture, what would have taken for you to heighten that to reasonable suspicion to search a backpack?
Any type of indicator that the student was going to be a threat to anybody, including himself.
Okay.
That would have heightened it to the next level.
And when you have
indicator that there was access to a firearm, or that he had made comments about wanting to hurt anybody, any statements written on there with names, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to, like, those would have all been things that would have changed the process that we followed.
And when you have a meeting with a parent and a student, do you rely upon the parent to provide information?
Absolutely. As an expert of their child, heavily rely on the parent for information.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Your Honor, may I ask one question
Sure.
on redirect? You also, so you're from a community where guns are popular, you testified about that. You also didn't ask if the Crumbleys had a gun, correct?
I did not ask that, no.
You're aware many of the families in Oxford have guns, but you did not ask them specifically if they had one, and they didn't tell you.
I didn't ask that question.
Thank you.
Anything?
No, Judge. Thank you.
You can step down in your excuse. Who's the next one?
Andy Smith?
He's in the hallway out here.
Wait, sir.
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
Could you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is a truth so help you?
Yes.
All right, you may be seated, and would you state your name for the record and spell your first and last name?
Andrew Smith, Andrew Smith, Smith.
Go ahead, prosecutor.
Good morning, Mr. Smith.
Good morning.
Can you tell the jury what your profession is?
I work for a real estate company. I'm the chief operating officer.
But you're also a lawyer.
And also I'm a lawyer, yes.
Okay. All right. So you're not technically practicing law, is that fair to say? Or
Not normally, from time to time I will, but that's not my primary responsibility.
okay, what are your primary responsibilities?
My title, I'm responsible for all the operations of a portfolio of real estate holdings, commercial, multifamily, industrial, throughout the country.
And about how many employees in the company?
Approximately 700.
Okay, so you're the COO of a real estate management company that has 700 employees. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you know Jennifer Crumbley?
I do.
How do you know her?
She worked for our company. She was the marketing director at my company.
Do you know what the time frame that was?
I believe she had been a marketing director for approximately a year, a little longer. Before that, she was on the marketing team in a different capacity. I'm not really sure when she hired him, but it was approximately 5 years, give or take, I think.
Okay. Do you see her in the courtroom today?
I do.
Can you tell the judge something she's wearing?
Tan, brown, sport coat, and glasses.
May the record reflect he's properly identified the defendant.
The record will still reflect.
So, did you supervise Jennifer Crumbley?
I was her direct supervisor when she was the marketing director, yes.
So how long was that?
I believe that was a year to year and a half.
Okay. What were her responsibilities as the marketing director?
She was responsible for handling the marketing of our portfolio properties, dealing with outside vendors, social media, dealing with reviews, online reviews, helping with leasing training, all that goes into marketing and asset.
Okay, and so does your company have social media accounts?
Yes.
What accounts do they have? In general, you don't have to
In
say
general,
that.
I know they have Facebook accounts for properties, and they have, I believe, Instagram as well.
Okay. Can you tell the jury what Jennifer's work week is? How many hours was she required to work, and what were the times that her beginning and end time?
I can approximate. She was a director, so I know she was responsible to work a 40-hour work week. The start and finish time fluctuated depending on schedules, whether it was 8 to 4, 9 to 5 type scenario.
Does she have a set schedule, or did it change day to day?
It was somewhat set with some flexibility depending on what was needed. I believe she came a little bit early, left a little bit early, if I recall correctly.
Okay. Was she ever allowed to work from home?
Yes, there was occasions where she would work remote.
And so you're saying she had done that before?
Yes.
Okay. Talk to me about the company's culture in terms of families.
I think we're very family friendly, family first type atmosphere.
So do you have employees that have issues with kids or family or personal things?
Me included, sure, yes.
Okay. And what is the company policy on that?
I think we're very big on family first culture. If you need time away we have a PTO policy, a paid time off policy to cover handling of your needs, but we also are very friendly when it comes to needing time for addressing what may be a child issue or child care, whatever it may be. Routinely, people will bring kids into work because of post-COVID needs for daycare and school closings and snow days, things like that.
What happened when the pandemic was in full force? Were employees still coming in every day, or were they working remotely, or both?
There was a little bit of both,
Okay.
depending on the job and the ability to do so.
Okay. Does the company provide health insurance?
We offer health insurance, yes.
And do you know if Jennifer had health insurance?
I do not know.
Okay. Do you know whether or not anyone else in her family was insured?
I have no idea. On our company policy,
Yes.
I'd have to look at those records. I don't know.
Okay, so if I handed you the records, would that refresh your recollection?
I'm not in charge of HR, but it would at least, I would assume, indicate whether or not she was on our policy, correct?
Okay, thank you. You're the COO, correct?
Correct.
Who does the human resources person report to?
A few people, but me included.
Okay. And does the company regularly keep benefits documents in the normal course of business for each employee?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. May I approach your Honor?
Sure.
Mr. Smith, I'm handing you a portion of the personnel file for Jennifer Crumbley that the defense has been provided. What is that?
This appears to be a 2021 new hire open enrollment form for what I believe to be healthcare options, medical healthcare options that year.
Okay. And I'm sorry, may I approach? Is this what you're looking at? This is contained in there. I just want to make
Yeah, this has got this is a different document, but it's similar. Okay.
All right. And what is that document? That's also part of her personnel file, but what is that?
Okay, the document you handed me appears to be a Guardian life insurance open enrollment form for 2021 for Jennifer Crumbley.
Okay. And the previous document you just had, what does that indicate? Who was enrolled in the health benefits?
It appears to be for Jennifer Crumbley, and there were multiple options. It appears she checked, or someone checked the box. She did, I believe, for single medical low plan.
And how much was that per month, if you know?
Well, it listed as $102.55 bi-weekly, so I guess it'd be $204 or $5 approximately a month.
And do you know approximately what the cost would have been to add somebody in her family?
So if I, on this plan, if I file it from single to employee plus one, it would have been $404. Family, $533.81.
Is that once a month or bi?
These are all bi-weekly.
Okay. All right. May I approach it?
You're not marking that.
No.
right?
I want to talk to you about November 30th, 2021.
Okay.
Do you remember that day?
I do.
Okay. As a matter of your daily routine, what were your hours?
It depends on my day, where I'm going, what's going on that day, but it's typical standard 40-hour work week. Some days can be longer, some days can be shorter.
You're also a parent, so did you come in early or did you come in late? What were you?
I remember that day specifically. I forget I was coming from that morning, but I remember that I was driving when I got a text from her that morning. I think it was around 10 a.m.
Okay. I'm going to show you an exhibit that's, I think it's been previously marked, that is from Jennifer's phone. How did you communicate with Jennifer?
In person,
Text message or Facebook Messenger? I'm sorry.
Oh, use text message would be primarily, yeah, text message.
Okay. This has been marked 152. I don't know if the jurors' eyes are. Oh, thank you so much. This monitor's not on.
Your Honor, I believe it's not only been marked, but it's admitted.
It's admitted.
Just check.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she's noticing that the TV isn't on. So I don't know how to turn it on. Magic. It's on.
Okay, thank you. Could the jury let me know if they can't see? I have a little trouble with seeing that. But can you see on the monitor?
Yes.
These are communications that begin that morning or that day, just from Jennifer Crumbley's phone. Looking through this exhibit, is that representative of your text messages that day?
I recognize the first two texts, and I believe that I recognize all these texts correctly.
Okay, is this the entire communication you had that day?
No.
So, are you saying something's missing?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to now show you screenshots that we received from your phone and your text messages between Jennifer Crumbley that same day.
Use the ones I gave you, yes.
Okay. Is your testimony that these accurately depict the entire text conversation of that day?
Could you scroll down?
Sure.
Okay. This looks accurate, yes.
Okay, so the message, the exhibit I just showed you had 4 messages, around 4 or 5. This is actually several messages. Is this your full conversation?
This would be the full conversation, yes, by text that day.
Okay. And when did you never deleted any text messages? Okay, so this is exactly what it was that you turned over to law enforcement?
Yes.
All right, thank you. The first text, if you can see this exhibit, if you go to the top, Mr. Smith, what's the time on the first text you received from Jennifer Crumbley?
This is Tuesday, 10:05 a.m.
And you said earlier, did you say you were driving to work or you were at work?
I forget, I was driving. Where I was going, I don't recall. Probably to work or coming from property, but I was
All right.
driving, yes.
Assuming you weren't reading your text messages while driving, this is when you received the text. Can you read her text to you?
I have to go to my kid's school. Counselor just called, and this is what I'm dealing with. I'll be back by 11:30, 12 at the latest.
Okay, so that text came in at 10:05, and she is telling you exactly when she'll be back.
That's what it says, yeah.
Okay, so then she attaches this, a picture. Do you know what that is?
I know now what it is.
Did you look at it at the time you received it?
No, I did look at it. It was later that day I looked at it, but not at the time I was driving at the time. I just saw the text on my phone pop up, and I
Okay.
just saw him.
Was it required that Jennifer let you know if she was leaving and where she was going, or was this unusual?
No, I mean, we want people to let us know if they're leaving, coming, going. She was good about that. She let me know if she was coming and going.
Sorry, is there something going on?
No,
What do you mean?
it's just, okay, thank you. Can you, the next, I believe there's some issue with a camera in the back, but I don't know. Can I proceed, Your Honor?
Your Honor, I'm sorry, it's very distracting, so I'm just asking if
Wait, what do
there's
you mean?
something happening.
Yeah, it's
Can
hard to
we-
hear the witness.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
It's hard to hear the witness of the conversation.
Oh, it's hard to hear the witness, yeah. Everybody has to be quiet, okay? Yeah. Yes, thank you.
May I proceed?
Yes.
The next message, well, before we get to the next message, tell me when was the first time you actually saw Jennifer Crumbley that day?
I don't remember the exact timeline. It's been 2 years, but I recall seeing her at the office around noon that day.
And where did you see her?
It was in the copy room, which is like an open copy room, storage type stationary area.
And did she say anything to you?
I recall walking up to her asking how was she doing, was she doing okay? And I recalled her mentioning that she had to get her child counseling. She seemed down. I think she had mentioned a few things. I recall her mentioning that his dog had passed away and a grandparent or grandparents had passed away. She may have said more. I remember she seemed down. I think she said she felt like she was a failure or failing him, and she had to get him counseling.
When she said, I feel like I'm failing him, who was she talking about?
I believe her son.
Okay. And what was your response?
I remember saying, if he needs counseling, I'm glad you're getting him counseling. Get him the help he needs. We're glad to hear you're getting him that help.
Okay. Did you and Jennifer have a friendship outside of work?
No.
Did you ever socialize together outside of any work centered event?
No.
You said you didn't Facebook message her, your conversations were just text or calling or email?
There may have been a Facebook message where she would send me photos from a property because of the size or scope I remember, but that'd be about it. But our communication will be in person, email, phone, or text.
And before this occurred, what, if anything, did you know about her son?
I knew she had a son in school. When she mentioned small talk, I knew he was in school. I recall something about him being in a bowling, an avid bowler, I recall correctly. And I remember that she mentioned some vacations they went on, some camping, some family trips. I recalled her discussing, he had a part-time job, I remember mentioning it sometime in the past. Small stuff like that, nothing much more.
Okay. Did she ever talk to you about taking him skiing?
I know she was big into skiing. I don't recall her mentioning her son skiing ever now.
How do you know she was big into skiing?
She talked about it quite a bit. I think she like volunteered, or she was like a volunteer ski instructor or ski school type thing. I don't remember
Or
exactly.
ski patrol?
Ski patrol, something more like that.
Do you know where that was?
Local, one of the local mountains, local hills.
Okay. Was her son with her that day?
At the office on the 30th?
Yes.
No.
Would that have been allowed?
Sure.
What was her schedule that day in terms of what she was required to be doing?
I don't know what her schedule was that day. She's a director. I'd give her some flexibility. I do know that we had a property visit scheduled that afternoon that she was invited to.
Was that a required meeting?
No, not at all.
Did you know at that time the school asked Mrs. Crumbley to get him counseling that day? Did she ever tell you that?
No, she just told me she had to get him counseling, was going to get him counseling.
Was there big project or assignment that Jennifer Crumbley was expected to do that day, an upcoming deadline that needed to be met that day?
I can't think of any deadline or anything bigger than this, but I'm sure she had a busy schedule as a director. I just don't recall anything specific, no.
Okay. But I guess what I'm asking is, had she asked to leave that day, would that have been a problem for the company? Or you were her supervisor?
It would have been no problem at all.
Did she have any paid time off collected?
I don't know what bank she had for PTO, but it wouldn't have mattered to me.
Okay. When was the next time you had any contact with Jennifer Crumbley? After you saw her in the copy room?
We had a quick meeting with another colleague shortly thereafter, 20 minutes, 30 minutes thereafter.
Can you give me a time frame about?
I think I saw her in the copy room about noon, and so 20, 30 minutes thereafter, around 12:20, 12:30 that afternoon. And we talked about the property we were going to visit, kind of what our goals while we were going there. And we had talked, I think, about some calls and things we had down the road a couple days later.
Okay, and when after that was your next contact with her?
I recall, because I was in a Zoom hearing at the time, about 1 o'clock, I think it was.
Okay.
I heard some loud commotion outside my office, like yelling. And
How close is Jennifer Crumbley's office, was it to yours?
10, 12 feet away.
Okay, and you said you heard, I don't want to put words in your mouth, what did you hear?
No, I just remember yelling, like a commotion, loud noise, like yelling, screaming type noise coming from down the hall.
And what did you do next?
I stepped away from my hearing. I looked outside to see what the noise was, and I saw her like racing out of her office, racing down the hall.
Did you learn, or did she say where she was going or what she was upset about?
I recall her saying there was an active shooter at her child's school, and I remember saying to her, go.
And so obviously you didn't have a problem with her leaving.
Not at all,
Okay.
no.
When was the next time that you had any contact with her after she left around 1 o'clock?
I got the text on this thread, the one on, it says 123, the gun is gone, so are the bullets, was the next time I received any communication from her.
Okay, so she leaves around 1. The text comes in at 1:23. Let's talk about this for a second. Did you know something about a gun prior to this?
No,
Did you know that she had purchased a gun for her son?
no.
Okay, so when you got this text, what were you thinking?
I didn't know what to think. It alarmed me.
Okay,
She just run out and I got that text. It was, I was really confused and alarmed.
all right, and what did you respond?
I responded by saying, I'm praying everything is okay.
And then the next text was from her. Can you read what she texted you?
There was a phone call that came in before that next text, if you just for timeline, if you remember that, but
Yes, I'm sorry, thank you. So she made a phone call that came in at what time? 1:25?
I don't remember the exact times. I can remember what happened.
Okay, so do you remember when you're saying the call came after I'm praying everything is okay?
I remember this because I was in a hearing. I was in a court hearing, covering hearing, and I stepped away and I got that because I was so alarmed by it that I walked down to my human resource director's office to let them know what had just transpired, to show her this text. And when I was in
And when you say this text, you mean just the one, the gun's gone and so are the bullets?
Correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Correct. Then I recalled receiving a phone call from her. I was in my HR director's office at the time, and I put it on speaker, and I remember there was a conversation.
And can you tell me what the conversation was about? What did Jennifer say?
I can't remember everything, but I remember vividly the sound of sirens in the background.
Was she in her car driving? Was she at home?
I believe she was in a car. She was in a car, I believe, driving. I remember her saying she was trying to get to her child's school.
Okay. So what did she say?
I remember her telling us she was trying to get to her child's school. I believe she said something about the gun was missing, or a family gun was missing. It was me and our HR director were both, we just both said, call the police, please call the police. I remember her saying that her husband had already called the police.
Okay. And were you aware that if her husband, first of all, had you ever Not James Crumbley?
I never personally know.
Okay. Were you aware that he in fact did call 911?
No, I mean, just what she told us.
Okay. Did she say he had already called, or he was going to call?
I believe she said he had already called the police.
All right. What happened after that? Did you end the conversation? Did she end the conversation?
I don't remember much more. Like, it was short. I mean, they've said, let us know something we can do to help, or let us know what we can do. Then I stayed with my HR director because we were trying to find out what was actually going on, and I got these next texts.
So you ended the call.
Yes.
You're still in the HR director's office, or were you in another room?
If I left, I would have left to go back to my office, which is about a minute away, to log off of Zoom.
Okay.
Or I can't remember exactly, but it would have been there or her office.
All right. And then the next text was from you or Jennifer?
It's from Jennifer to me.
Okay, and can you read that?
OMG, Andy, he's going to kill himself. He must be the shooter.
All right, now there's no timestamp on those specific messages, which normally would indicate they're coming in along the same string. Is that correct, or do you remember there was a significant period of time that lapsed?
I don't remember the exact times, but I want to recall those being somewhat close in proximity within the same half-hour time frame.
Okay, and then the next text,
I need a lawyer at substation with police.
and then the next text.
Ethan did it.
Okay. What's going through your mind at this point?
Shock, fear, sadness, a lot of emotions. We didn't really know what to think.
Okay. And you testified earlier, after I asked a few questions, that you're actually a lawyer.
Yes.
Okay. Do you practice any kind of criminal law?
Never, no.
Okay. Had she ever asked you for a lawyer before?
I could ask that question a lot by people. She may have. I don't recall.
Okay. So it appears from this text string that you didn't respond via text right away.
No, I recall there was another phone call.
Okay.
Sometime shortly after that last text, Ethan did it. There was another phone call she made to me, because I remember I was still in my HR director's office at the time, and we were together. Maybe another colleague was there.
Was it on speaker or?
Yes, I put it on speaker.
Okay. And what did she say?
I believe she said she was at the police station or had been at the police station, and that she needed a lawyer. Could I recommend a lawyer?
And what did you say?
I couldn't think of one at the time. It's not my area, and I just couldn't think of one. And I think I told her I'd ask our corporate counsel if she could think of someone to recommend.
Okay. What was going on at the office at this point? Were there people around? The people in the office, did anyone have any outside knowledge of the shooting?
I don't know.
Okay.
I was working with human resource at the time, and we were trying to figure out what was going on.
Okay. What eventually did you decide? Did you guys go back to work? Did you just wait for another communication? Did you start looking for a lawyer?
I did not look for a lawyer. I mentioned as I told her, I mentioned to corporate counsel that this is what we just learned, and she's reaching out. If you could reach out back to her, let her know. I know we were closely watching the news, trying to figure out what was happening, what had happened. And I remember I left a little bit early that day to get home with my family.
Why'd you do that?
There were a lot of emotions going on. I just wanted to get home and see my family.
Okay. At some point, did you receive another text from Jennifer Crumbley?
Yes, at 3:39 on this thread, it says I got a text that
So that's about 2.5 hours after she left the office when the shooting occurred?
approximately, yes.
All right, and what does the text say?
I need my job. Please don't judge me for what my son did.
What did you think when you received that text?
I was a little taken back. I was surprised that she was worried about work right then.
Did you respond?
I did. At 5:47 p.m. Let me read the text.
So at this point, were you at work or were you home with your family?
I think I was home at that point.
Okay, and your response was what?
I can't even begin to understand what you're going through. I'm praying for you. I asked Carolyn to text you some attorney recommendations, and Carolyn's our corporate counsel.
All right, and did she respond?
She did. I don't know what time, but it was later after that text. They were taking my cell phone.
Was that the last communication you had with Jennifer Crumbley?
That's the last time I can recall communicating with her, yes.
Okay, at some point did the company terminate her employment?
Yes, she was terminated.
Okay, do you remember about when that was?
I want to say it was a couple of days, I don't remember the exact date. It was some days after this incident, November 30th. Whether it was 2 or 3 days, I don't remember exactly.
Okay. At the beginning of this, I showed you the text string from Jennifer's phone versus your phone. Was there any ever discussion or comments from Jennifer about why she's deleting text messages to you?
Did she ever talk to me about the, no, I never had that conversation with her.
Do you know why?
I don't guess, no idea.
All right, nothing further.
Cross?
Your Honor, I have quite a bit of cross because there's previous testimony. Is it a good time to break?
No?
Okay.
I don't know. If you
Your
guys
Honor,
would break-
if we could just finish with the cross so we can excuse this witness.
Yeah, we we're 2 hours
Okay.
late today.
I
and
have
I'd
no-
like to know, you guys aren't starving to death over there, are you?
I have
Okay.
no problem. Okay. All right. Mr. Smith, I just want to go back to a couple of things you said. You and Jennifer, you would not say you guys were friends outside of work, correct?
We were coworkers and friendly at work.
Okay, friendly at work, you guys would make small talk.
Sure, yes.
And you, when you heard that something was going on at the high school, you would agree with me that Mrs. Crumbley sounded very frantic.
When she called us the first time I heard the sirens, she definitely sounded panicked, frantic, yes.
You would agree she sounded shocked and concerned?
Yes.
And you testified that when you saw her at the office earlier, coming back from the school, she had appeared sad.
Yes.
It was during that time when Mrs. Crumbley was at your office that you guys discussed the meeting she had had at the school earlier that day.
Yes.
And during that meeting, she told you that the school wanted her to get her son in some counseling, correct?
I don't know if she said this. I think so. I know she said she had to get her son counseling.
She was planning to get her son
Yes,
counseling.
yes.
And it's appeared you were aware she was worried about her son at that time.
Yes.
Mrs. Crumbley is not someone who had a history of constantly disrupting her day at work. Is that fair to say?
It's a tough question to answer, but yeah, it's fair. I don't remember disruptions. No.
I suppose a better question would be, she was not a parent who was constantly having to leave work to go to her child's school for different reasons.
That I don't recall any other examples of that.
You never had any concerns personally about how Mrs. Crumbley parented her son.
I never had concerns, no.
And if anything, you would just hear about little bits and details about him. I think you testified about bowling, vacations, camping.
I recall her mentioning them, yes.
You recalled the part-time job, skiing.
I don't know. I know she skied. I don't know if he did. I don't remember that.
Okay. And in terms of Jennifer working at the company prior to her being terminated, you would agree with me that she was a pretty consistent hard worker.
I would agree with you, yes.
And Jennifer appeared to take her career very seriously.
I agree, yes.
She was diligent about attending meetings she was invited to or supposed to attend.
Yes.
She was somebody the company could count on to do her job.
I thought so, yes.
And there were times she took advantage of the flexibility that your company offered to allow her to go handle different matters she may have needed to handle.
I know she would have taken advantage of the flexibility to do what I don't know, but sure.
Okay. And I'm correct when I say that Kathy Poliquin, she's the manager of HR, correct?
She was what at the time was the director of human resources.
I'm sorry, director of human resources?
Correct.
Okay. I have her listed as a witness, but I may, based on the prosecution's questions, I may be able to just ask you, But if you're not the right person, can you just let me know?
Yes.
Okay, so you testified that to have a single person on the company's insurance was approximately $200 per month.
That's what I read, yes, yes.
And you would agree, well, and I'm sorry, when you say $200,
It was bi-weekly, so I don't know if you.
okay, that's what I was just gonna ask. So is $200 twice a month?
My understanding is yes.
And if she had had another person added to the insurance, it would have been approximately $500 twice a month.
I don't have the document in front of me, but I know it went up from +1 and then went up again for family.
Okay, and when it goes up for family, are you aware of what it would have been for there to be 3 people on the insurance?
I'd be guessing. My understanding is family covers as many families you may have, immediate family. I don't know if it's 3 to 10. It covers your entire family, my understanding.
It's fair to say that in the past you have complained that the healthcare costs taken from your paychecks is significant.
Have I complained? No, because I'm not on the health plan then.
So you're not on the health plan at Princeton, correct?
I'm not on my company's plan, correct?
But I assume you have healthcare through somewhere else.
Correct.
And in this case, with the Crumbleys, you're not aware if they had healthcare through another source, correct?
Correct.
And as far as you know, Mr. Crumbley had a job, a professional job in the past. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I remember he had a job, a career, and I think he was laid off or in between jobs at the time.
And you're not aware if Mrs. Crumbley, Mr. Crumbley, or their son was covered on Mr. Crumbley's insurance?
I'm not aware.
In addition to the insurance offered at Princeton, there's also a plan through Allied that you guys can take advantage of where you get virtual doctor visits. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware of that, yes.
And those virtual doctor visits are free as part of the Allied benefit.
I believe so, yes.
And you can also get Aflac supplemental insurance for yourself and your family members.
And you're getting in the HR world, but my understanding is yes, you can elect those benefits.
Now, the open enrollment period is right in approximately November every year. Is that right?
I honestly don't recall when, but I know it's every year at the same time, and it's open for approximately 30 days, I believe.
And you may not be the right witness, and if you're not, just let me know.
Okay.
Are you aware that in November of 2021, Mrs. Crumbley was doing anything with her insurance?
I'm not aware, no.
Now, when you were texting or exchanging messages with Mrs. Crumbley, there was not any point in time where she said to you, "Hey Andy, delete these texts," correct?
That's correct.
So she texted you over a photograph of that math paper.
She sent that to me, yes.
Obviously, when you look at that math paper, especially knowing what we know today, it's very alarming.
Yes.
And she texted you openly that the gun was gone and so are the bullets.
That's what she texted me, yes.
And when you were texting with her, you were exchanging back kind words to her, supporting her and saying things along the lines of, "I'm praying for you, I hope everything's okay," things like that, correct?
Well, not things, that exactly.
That exactly. And you knew at the time that you were communicating those things to Mrs. Crumbley, she was in a high state of stress.
I saw her run out of the office in panic.
Not only did you see her run out of the office in panic, you heard her screaming when she heard about the open shooter.
I heard her like yelling, screaming that she had to leave. There was I forget exactly, but there was a shooting event going on at her child's school.
Definitely a strong reaction from Mrs. Crumbley about what was happening.
Yes.
Now, after Mrs. Crumbley found out more information, we saw the text where Mrs. Crumbley is saying, "I need my job. please don't judge me for what my son did, correct?
That's a text, correct?
Now, at that time, you're aware that James Crumbley was laid off.
I knew he was in between jobs. I don't know what he was doing at that point.
And so Mrs. Crumbley is certainly voicing the concern to you, I don't want to lose my job, correct?
She sent a text, I need my job.
As far as you knew from working with Mrs. Crumbley over time, she liked her job, was good at it, and valued that job.
I thought she was good at her job, yes.
And her text indicating she wanted to keep her job, you have no reason to believe she didn't want to keep her job.
No, none.
I have nothing further.
Redirect?
Nothing, Your Honor. May he be excused?
Yeah, you may step down and you're excused.
Thank you so much.
All right, your lunch is here. How about 1:45? We lost some time today. I think one of the jurors was making a snowman, another one was late. Good. We'll see that, okay?
All right, jury.
All right, you may be seated. You know, could I have the prosecutor approach on an unrelated matter, actually a sort of related matter, which is the other, are you off?
You want me to be?
Yes.
That's fine.
I